Alongside legendary kings like Ramesses the Great and Seti I, is a little-known pharaoh whose reign is shrouded in mystery. It starts with a dead body. The mummified remains of a man known as Sylvester. Professors Jerry Conlogue and Ron Beckett have spent the last 30 years examining hundreds of mummies from around the world. This is their specialty.
This guy is in amazing condition. You know, it almost looks like a wood carving.
Unbelievable.
I've never seen a mummy this well preserved, that's for sure.
I think the most remarkable feature is his face.
He's recognizable almost, if we had a picture.
It's recognizable. He's got eyebrows. Look, you can see the pupils of his eyes.
In his ears.
You can see where they've just dried, but the shape is perfect. And the teeth, it looks like there's a central incisor missing. And I can't help but to admire his mustache.
I like it. I like it too.
Got a great mustache. His hands are also remarkable. The fingernails almost look manicured. I mean, they're just so perfect. And it almost looks like he was holding something.
An autopsy would destroy the mummy, but using state-of-the-art technology, forensic pathologist Dr. Richard Shepard can see inside.
As a pathologist, of course, I want to see what's happening inside the body, what's happening to the internal organs. And with this technology, I'm able to do that. We can see the skin on the outside, but I can actually also cut down through the tissues and look internally at the body. We can look at the internal organs and see exactly how they lie and how they are within the body. I mean, the preservation of this mummy is quite incredible.
So who was he? And how did he end up a mummy? Since 1955, Sylvester has been on display here at the Old Curiosity Shop in Seattle.
My father was the one that got him. He's absolutely the coolest thing we have. He's been very good for business.
He's really famous. We're not, but he is. The Wild West was pretty wild, so he was a pretty tough guy.
Sylvester is just a nickname. No records survive to tell us who he really was, but there's a legend that dates from the final days of the Old West, chronicled in newspapers and passed down to the tourists.
Now this is the story of the Old West, and it's a story of a man named Sylvester. And he was a dangerous gunslinger. In a little town way out in the southwestern deserts, they were in this bar playing cards. And somebody was cheating. We don't know who it was, but one called the other a cheater. And next thing you know, they go for their guns. The guns are jerked. White gun smoke filled the room. And Sylvester got hit, took a bullet. He picked himself up off the floor, and there was so much smoke in that room that they couldn't see. They tried to shoot at him again, but he got away. He slipped out into the desert.
Is the legend of Sylvester, outlaw and gunslinger, based on fact or fiction?
Don't shoot me, I don't want to fight.
Although sometimes embellished, tales of famous shootouts, like the one at the OK Corral, are based on historical events.
Was there violence in the Old West? Were there gunslingers in the Old West? Absolutely there were. We know historically who some of them were. Did those people have gun battles? Did they shoot one another? No doubt at all.
And notorious gunslingers like Doc Holliday really did exist. But can the same be said of Sylvester?
In the late 19th century, early 20th century, all the way up to the 50s, sideshows were very popular. I remember as a kid going into the sideshows, and they were always kind of interesting. You know, the two-headed calf and the 13-toed goat or whatever it might be. And perhaps there'd be a mummy, and that would really be a draw. Mummies have been a curiosity for we humans for as long as we knew they were around. If you had a real Egyptian mummy, you had a sideshow. If you didn't, you could get some embalmed individual.
Ron believes Sylvester was embalmed professionally and put on display. But a sideshow operator then acquired the body and took it on the road to make some cash.
But if he goes on the road, he has to have a great story. It can't be just, a college professor, because who would come see them? So it has to have this story. He's a card thief. And he was shot in the stomach and died in the desert sand. Ooh, I want to go see that.
People are going to come into the sideshow, put their quarter down, and then touch a gunfighter. Wow, that's pretty incredible for a quarter.
Few tales tap into the American psyche better than that of a gunfighter in the Old West.
When we look at the number of television shows, popular movies right well into the 21st century that deal with this subject, the number of romantic novels, it almost is the backdrop to everything we are. This is our identity as Americans, regardless of where we live. In some way, we all have that little bit of cowboy in us.
In Sylvester's own lifetime, that Old West identity was already fading, to be replaced by industrialization and the growth of large cities. Opportunists like Buffalo Bill created an industry commercializing the cowboy myth. And legends like Sylvester have been a massive moneymaker ever since.
He is part of the reason we see the West as the gunslinging, lawless place where Doc Holliday's shooting people up everywhere, because that's the story we gave Sylvester. Whether it's the true story or not, didn't matter. What mattered is, how do you get people in the sideshow? He was a gunslinger. He was shot right here. And he died a terrible death in the Old West. And that's how they sold him. And he became the mythology of the good old days in the Old West.
But can the team uncover evidence proving the sideshow theory? It all comes back to the hole in Sylvester's belly.
This is supposedly where he was shot. A bullet went in there. But when Ron and I looked at it, it looked too circular. So now when we put the endoscope in, we see that there's this spiral pattern.
All right, we're inside.
Oh, Ron.
You see the spirals.
There are spirals.
Okay.
What could have caused that spiral pattern? A drill, a manual drill. We actually drilled a hole through wood with this, went with the endoscope, and we saw almost exactly the same spiral pattern in the wood. Let's see if it fits. And I can't just push it in, I've got to kind of screw it in, because that's how it would have gone in, and it fits perfect. Exact fit. So Ron and I have looked at 7 sideshow mummies. All of them have fantastic stories, but you got to make the story believable. And if you take that 1/4 inch or 6mm drill, you poke the hole, you put a little red paint there, someone's going to come and look at this guy for a quarter.
September 19th, 1991. High on the icy ridges of the South Tyrol Mountains in northern Italy. Hikers Erica and Helmut Simon decided to take a shortcut down from the peak. As they passed a rocky gully, they made a grisly discovery. Jutting from the ice, the head and bare shoulders of a human corpse. His left arm twisted under his body. Leathery skin still covering his bones. The mummy was found here, close to the Austrian and Italian border. Analysis revealed that when he died, he was in his mid-40s. But how long had this Iceman been lying on the mountain? The carbon dating unlocked the shocking truth.
The result was 5,300 years. So this mummy is more than 5,000 years old.
Piecing together the details of this Iceman's life is going to be a challenge. He walked the earth nearly 1,000 years before the Great Pyramids were built. The last populations of woolly mammoths still roamed in Siberia, and the invention of the wheel was still a century away. He's one of the oldest preserved corpses on the planet, frozen in time, locked in ice for thousands of years. The Iceman was given a name, Otzi, after the Otzi mountain range where his remains were found. He lived in a period known as the Neolithic, a time of great change. Farming settlements were just taking hold. For Otzi, hunting was probably still a major source of food. But the nature of his death remained a mystery. With no clues and no firm leads, the investigation recorded cause of death as hypothermia.
The theory was that he just went up there, even just by chance, or maybe he took the wrong way, and then he died of exhaustion and because of the cold weather and so on.
Otzi froze at 11,000 feet, nearly 4,000 meters, on a desolate icy ridge. But now, challenging that theory is archaeologist Dr. Francis Pryor, a specialist in Neolithic life. Francis Pryor shifts the direction of his investigation. He thinks Otzi's slaughter may have more to do with the location of the body than the crime scene itself. Otzi was found in a place where the landscape suddenly changes. These areas are known as liminal zones and are associated throughout history with human sacrifice.
He was found in a liminal zone. He was above the tree line, in the snow, and that's where we do find sacrificial victims.
From the dark pools of ancient peat bogs to frozen mountains at the heart of mighty empires, humans of all ages and social rank have been chosen as the ultimate sacrifice. Valuable offerings to wrathful gods. Did Otzi meet a similar end and become a human sacrifice on an icy glacier? Francis Pryor believes there is one more piece of vital evidence which will support his sacrificial theory. Near the bow, lying on a stone slab, was one of the most precious archaeological finds ever made: Otzi's copper axe.
The radiocarbon dates for Otzi came through, and there could be absolutely no arguing with them. This axe was 3,300 BC, which shoved the appearance of copper back a full half millennium.
Otzi's copper axe rewrites the history books, pushing the Copper Age back 500 years. Making this axe required enormous skill.
In order to make copper, you've got to get temperatures in excess of 1,000 degrees centigrade. It's all about the control of heat. That is the key thing.
Francis Pryor believes the axe is another clue supporting his idea that Otzi was a victim of ritual sacrifice. Smelting and casting copper over 5,000 years ago was seen as almost magical, a rare skill. This Neolithic axe was a diamond jewel of its day. Was it, like Otzi, a sacrificial gift to the gods?
Had that been a vendetta, had that been a robbery, had that been a casual killing, you would not walk off and leave something as incredibly valuable as a copper axe lying there.
British Egyptologist Dr. Chris Naunton is on the trail of an ancient Egyptian mystery.
What I can see is a shaft, a deep shaft cut directly into the rock. It goes down about 20 meters, about 60 feet, and it leads to a network of tunnels. And these extend for about 100 meters, 300 feet, something like that. And in the walls of these tunnels, there are niches, kind of side chambers.
The discovery is known today as the Royal Cache. Among the mummies are 10 pharaohs, including some of the greatest names of ancient Egypt. But alongside legendary kings like Ramesses the Great and Seti I is a little-known pharaoh whose reign is shrouded in mystery. Sekenenre Tao.
Sekenenre isn't as famous as some of his successors like Ramesses the Great or Seti I, but the fact that he was buried alongside those pharaohs suggests that for the ancient Egyptians, he was every bit a part of that line of great kings.
Who is this mystery pharaoh buried among the greats? The first clue, an inscription on the lid of his coffin. Sekenenre the Brave. Why the brave? Hidden inside the coffin was a mummy the likes of which had never been seen before.
When we look at the front of his face, it certainly doesn't look normal. It's very distorted. You may just be able to see the ends of the nose there, but the whole of the nose, the eye on the right, the bridge of the nose, the eye on the left are all very distorted.
Sekenenre is unique. He's the only mummified pharaoh ever found with such violent injuries. Dr. Richard Shepard is a world-renowned forensic pathologist. His specialty? The investigation of suspicious deaths.
These are the two wounds to the right side of Sekenenre's head. This is a wound where actually a piece of the skull has been forced in. It's been smashed into his brain underneath this, producing this large crater-like effect. This wound has a slightly different appearance, partly because I think a bit of the bone has broken off, possibly as the weapon was removed. It's flipped a piece of the outer part of the skull off. But this too has actually cut through. It's punched into the skull.
A mutilated mummy with an heroic epitaph. Understanding how he died is the key to unlocking the secrets of his life. Dr. Shepard turns to the only full autopsy ever performed on the body. It was carried out 100 years ago by anatomist Elliot Smith. His conclusions? Sekenenre died from axe wounds received in battle. Dr. Shepard is taking a closer look at Smith's report.
Elliot Smith says axe in his report, and I'd back it up forensically from our knowledge now. When I look at these two injuries, what I can say is that they are both lethal wounds, and you'd probably only need one of them to cause death, but the two together are a certain cause of death.
The experts agree on the cause of death. Fatal axe blows to the head. But did he receive these wounds on the battlefield? And if so, why risk a pharaoh's life on the front line? was uncovered in the Andean mountains of South America, on the lonely, snow-capped peak of the world's tallest active volcano, Mount Uyayaco. The year was 1999, and a high-altitude archaeological excavation was underway. Leading the team was explorer and anthropologist Dr. Johann Reinhardt.
All of a sudden I heard this guy cry out, "Mummy!"
They had discovered the highest tomb on Earth.
I went, holy smoke, we're at 22,000 feet. When she first came out of the ground, she was completely wrapped up. We couldn't see any part of her body, but the textiles were just outstanding, and they were so well preserved.
But the biggest surprise came when they removed her wrappings.
We're taking off the cloth of the girl. We had to talk, we had to communicate, do this, do that. It was in hushed voices. It was as if we were afraid at some level that we might wake this mummy up because she seemed just so alive. But nothing had the impact of when we uncovered her hands. Probably one of the most powerful experiences I've had in my life because those hands were perfect. We realized that this has got to be, if not the best preserved mummy in the world. We don't know of any other better.
And preserved along with her a spectacular collection of artifacts, ceramics, figurines, and textiles.
Everything seemed totally untouched. It was perfectly preserved. Nothing, not a feather had shrunk, not a color had faded, the archaeologist's dream.
Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to bury this girl in an extraordinary place. Now a team of investigators will attempt to decipher these objects, examine her body, and unravel the mysteries of this mummy. The first question, when did she die? The items in her tomb reveal the remarkable truth. They may look brand new, but archaeologists date them to over 500 years ago. Remnants of a legendary civilization, the Inca.
The statues that were with her, the ceramics that were with her, everything was from the Inca Empire.
This girl is a human link to the great empire that dominated South America in the 15th century. Famous for building Machu Picchu, the Inca are cloaked in mystery. Wiped out by Spanish conquest, they left no written language. So this girl is a rare and valuable glimpse into a lost civilization. Today she is conserved under the watchful eye of Gabriella Ricagno Browning.
For me, the Maiden is not only a scientific object. She is a young woman that I love. I think that one of my missions in life is to take care of her.
Affectionately known as the Maiden, this mummy attracts visitors from all over the world. But some are not prepared for what they see.
When people here meet the Maiden, sometimes they get very shocked. They cry or they get sad because it's difficult to understand the death of this maiden, of this girl.
An Inca girl, buried 500 years ago on top of a volcano. Her corpse is strange. Seated and slumped, she looks like she slept to her death. Mountain rescue Dr. Marcelo Parada has seen this sort of death before, in the victims of avalanches.
They were buried for quite a long time, 4 or 5 hours, and when we dug them out, they were dead, hypothermic, and they had vomit around their mouth.
The Maiden does have vomit on her lips. So was this her terrible fate? Did priests bury her alive as an offering to the gods?
When someone's buried alive, there's always that struggle to escape from the material that's pinning them down. So there's evidence of movements of the hands, sometimes with damage to the nails and the fingertips. Looking at the Maiden, I don't see any evidence at all to suggest that she was buried alive.
Johann Reinhardt was one of the first people to lay eyes on her tomb after it was sealed 500 years earlier.
There's no sense of struggle in the tomb itself. All the items that are around her look like they haven't been disturbed. She herself looks like she hasn't been terribly disturbed. Her hands one over the other. If somebody's struggling, would you have their hands like this? Doesn't seem very likely.
Looking back at his discovery now, Johann believes that the murder weapon may have been staring him in the face. One of the first things he had to remove from her body was a thick woolen cloth, pulled over her entire head and knotted tightly at the back.
Once you have cloths wrapped around your head and your mouth at 22,000 feet, you're out of breath immediately. You know, I mean, it just...
She could have asphyxiated if she was highly intoxicated with alcohol.
Marcello agrees that it wouldn't have taken much to smother the Maiden, given her condition.
There is a point where intoxicated people, their brain is so compromised, they won't even struggle.
Perhaps the alcohol was administered to help ease her journey out of this world and into the next.
In a situation of low oxygen, when the person is at altitude, incapacitated through drugs or alcohol, it's likely they're going to succumb far more quickly than were they down at sea level.
Having weighed up all the evidence, Dr. Shepard delivers his final verdict.
Having considered all of the facts, I think suffocation is a very likely cause of death for the Maiden.
For 500 years, the Inca Maiden has guarded the secrets of how she died. Now, the truth is revealed. A gentle suffocation to send her to the gods.
I don't think she suffered. She wasn't aware of that. That's what alcohol does. You're kind of isolated from the environment.
We think that the Maiden died peacefully. In this case, there are no presence of violence. You can see in her face that she rests in peace.
When the Inca offered this child to the gods, they believed she would live forever, eternally young, immortalized in her glorious sacrifice. That is what Gabriella wants to believe too.
I prefer to think as her as a goddess and that she's happy in some way. Traumatic happiness, but happiness at least. The alternative is too sad.
Bound by the ropes cut into his arms, his final walk to the place of execution would have been agonizing.
O'Connor was a young man. He would have almost certainly have had children. He would have had a clear view of the hill and of the inauguration mound on which he was made king. So one would wonder what sort of reflections would have passed through his mind at that last moment. It must have been a very frightening experience. They knew that they were going to face a very violent death. body was found right in the middle of that bog. And there he was put to death, and he was beheaded.
After 24 centuries, the secrets of this mummy's death have come to light. He was a man brutally killed by others, not a fallen soldier in battle, or the victim of random violence. This man died for his people.
This man was a former king who failed in his kingship, and that his death is the natural consequence of that. He's being killed so that he can be replaced by a new, young, vigorous, successful king who will be married to the same cruel goddess as this man was. So, such was life in ancient Ireland.
We may never know his real name, but archaeologists call him Croghan Man, because he was found here, under the shadow of a place called Croghan Hill, located in central Ireland. It's a potential clue in figuring out who he was, because Croghan Hill was once the center of an ancient Irish kingdom.
When I came along to view the bog body down here in the bog, one immediately saw Croghan Hill, and one immediately knew the significance of this hill. This is the inauguration hill of the kings of this region.
During the Iron Age, Ireland was divided into hundreds of kingdoms, each ruled by a different king, crowned in sacred spaces or on hills like this one. What role did Croghan Man play in this ancient kingdom?
When we look closer at the hands of this individual, we can see that his fingernails are really very well trimmed, they're manicured, and they're clean. There's no way that this person has been working in the fields doing heavy manual work.
There were no scars or calluses on the hand. So this was a man who did not do manual labor. The other thing that was noted was that he had beautifully manicured fingernails. This indicates that this is a man of high social status.
So Croghan Man probably wasn't a warrior or a farmer. But there's another clue that might tell us who he was.
On his left arm, you can see he had an armlet. And it's an armlet made of plated leather with copper alloy mounts on it as well. The wearing of armlets, we believe, are indicative of high status. And in the Irish tradition, armlets are all associated with solar worship.
Archaeologists believe these hilltop monuments are strong evidence of sun and sky worship during the Iron Age. And the metal clips on Croghan Man's armlet could represent the sun and perhaps indicate he was a religious leader known as a druid.
They were very much a separate elite class. They kept themselves to themselves. It would take up to 20 years to learn to be a druid. So once you were chosen to become a druid, you'd be taken off at a young age and you would be taught the secrets. And then you would come back to society and be revered as this unknown person who has great power and links to the gods and to nature.
Tall, strong, high status, and possibly a religious leader. The next step for investigators is to piece together how he died. A cloud of death envelops Herculaneum, killing more than 300, including the soldier. Like the other victims, his skeleton shows evidence of exposure to extreme heat.
So there's significant signs of burning on this body. You can see the dark charring that's on the back of the left shoulder, the back of the head, and coming down to the arm. And these areas are really quite significant, showing there's been extensive exposure to heat of these areas.
But what explains the position of his hand?
So when you look at the left hand, it's not flat on the ground. This left hand is curled in as though he's desperately trying to crawl his way as a last gasp effort to get away from whatever is happening, the thing that finally killed him.
It looks like he's crawling away. But Pier Paolo Petrone has seen it before and has a scientific explanation.
The contracted end is found everywhere. Something like this. With everyone, with every individual. And that's just contraction induced by the heat, by the high temperature. So all people has hands and feet completely contracted.
But the soldier's death differs in one important respect. Unlike most of the others who were trying to seek shelter, the soldier stood his ground in the middle of the beach. The question is, why?
It's quite possible that he was on his own because he was ordering people, instructing people to seek cover. I think he was managing the evacuation process. He was looking after all these people, and he was trying to do his best to save as many people as he could. Now, when he heard the cloud, the rumbling of the cloud coming, he was barking orders, getting people to race in to the vaults to try and save their lives.
A soldier is standing here. He doesn't move. It's easy to imagine him standing here, yelling at everybody to get themselves into the boat vaults. Make yourself safe. Get in there, protect yourself. But he doesn't move. He stands here, and he's found right there.
So what would have happened in that last final split second? The heat would have caused his skin to dissolve. Underneath his skin, the muscles would have then been affected by the heat. They would have been drawn out. The fat that was in the body would have begun to burn, and that would have helped burn the muscles away. And then eventually, we're just left with the skeleton that we see lying face down on the ground.
2,000 years later, archaeologists will find him on the beach of Herculaneum. He died dressed in his full military kit, with a pocket full of coins. Given the chance to escape, he chose to stay, waiting on the beach with the 300 until the very end.
I think the guy on the beach, I think he was generally a good guy. I'd like to think he was a good guy.
You can see him, warts and all. This was a human being there. This wasn't an ideal hero. Extraordinary times create extraordinary people. And while this man may have been a bit of a down and out in his private life, and it's easy to imagine what he did in his spare time, at the time of Vesuvius, it looks as though he was the man trying to protect the survivors of Herculaneum. I think he was a good man at the end.